Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from Montana, we have Kathy Davis. Kathy is a plant-based lifestyle coach, recipe developer, the CEO of VegInspired, and the author of 3 cookbooks. Her third cookbook, the BudgetFriendly Plant-Based Diet Cookbook, came out August 17th. Welcome, Kathy.
Hi, Fred. Thanks so much for having me. I love to hear when other people say my intro because it just makes me smile.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. Let's start with your vegan journey. How and when did you transition to a plant-based diet?
I transitioned about 7 years ago, and it's a funny little story. My husband actually introduced me to the idea of eating a plant-based diet for health, and to be honest, I was a resistor. I was so afraid to give up my favorite cheeseburgers and buffalo wings. I grew up in Western New York, so the buffalo wing was just a weekly thing in my house, and blue cheese dressing. There were so many foods that I didn't want to give up. And I trusted him. He liked to cook at the time, so he did a lot of the cooking. And I said, okay, let's ease into this. For 6 months, he shared awesome, delicious recipes with me. Cheeses made from squash and cashews, sauces made from tofu, things that I wasn't really sure I was going to love, I ended up loving. And the more I found that I loved these plant-based foods and I could eat them without missing my burgers. So now I have a favorite veggie burger that I go to, and I have a favorite vegan, whole food, plant-based blue cheese style dressing that I use. And I love buffalo cauliflower wings. Once I learned that there were alternatives that would satisfy those cravings, I was ready. And the pivot to veganism really happened overnight. I was at a friend's house, and they had some baby cows that were just born, and it all made the connection all came together. I knew that those cows would be raised for slaughter, and I knew I didn't want to participate in that anymore. So I have been officially vegan for 7 years, but really exploring that way of eating for about 7.5, 8 years. And I love it. I could never go back now.
Now, you mentioned you were at a friend's house and they had some cows. Can you take us back to that moment when the switch clicked?
Absolutely. I was standing there in the field, and the mama cow was pretty protective of her baby calf, brand new. And I was just thinking, oh, it's so precious. And then I realized that I didn't want to eat those babies anymore. I didn't want that to be my story. And I remember getting in the car and saying to my mom, because she was with me, I said, I'm going vegan. I'm doing this all in. I'm done. I can't eat those babies anymore. And I remember her saying, oh my goodness, are you really ready for this? What about the foods that you love? And I said, I'll figure it out. I mean, we had been eating plant-based meals for 6 months at that point, not every day, right? I was still eating some of the animal products, but for the most part, our diet was, let's say, 75% plant-based. It was just those few items that I had such a hang up on. And once I looked in that mama cow's eyes and the baby cow, I couldn't contribute to that anymore.
Now, when you think about that decision, because that's a big decision, what sticks out in your mind?
For me, there was a lot of fear. I was really afraid of missing out. I was afraid of never eating the foods that I wanted to eat again, and never experiencing the traditions with family and just the things that I loved. But in that moment, I really realized that it's more than me. And I had so many good meals. I knew I wouldn't miss out anymore. I knew that the foods would still be delicious. They would just be different. And I knew that my husband was going to participate in eating vegan and really this lifestyle change with me. So I knew I didn't have to do it alone. It was really more about the unknown, right? The fear of the unknown of what am I going to do when I'm dining out, or what am I going to do when I'm at a friend's house? And really just taking each of those events and circumstances day by day, time by time, and event by event, and working on what you can control. I mean, it's easier said than done now because I've seen it happen. But in that moment, I was scared.
What is it about food that you think makes people fearful?
You know, Fred, I think it is the fear of the unknown. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, what's in that vegan cheese? And we make a lot of whole food ingredients. We use a lot of whole food ingredients in our cooking. So oftentimes the things that are in the cheese are cashews, maybe a little non-dairy milk.
Mm-hmm.
Our queso, we use butternut squash and salsa. So these are all very familiar foods. But then when you mention something like nutritional yeast, people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't want to eat yeast that goes in bread. Is this going to taste like a bread? I think it's the fear of the unknown of what things are. And we don't think, you know, I always use the hot dog as an example. We don't really know what's in a hot dog.
Right.
Right? It's gross. But people will eat that because it's normal. It's been made normal. Whereas vegan cheese made from cashews, that's a little scary. That's not normal. And so I think it's the fear of the unknown, of not knowing if they're going to like it and being deprived of what they do enjoy. And honestly, what I've found is I have such an abundance of foods now that I love that I never would have been exposed to before I decided to eat plants as a way of life.
What positive changes did you see both mentally and physically after you changed to being vegan?
Yes. Well, 7 years ago, it was really such a difference in how I felt. You know, I remember someone asking me, well, how do you feel now that you're not eating animal products, right? We think animal products are the end all be all. And I remember looking at her and being like, I feel amazing. I feel lighter. I feel cleaner. It was a really eye-opening experience to feel this sense of energy. And then as those 7 years went on, I gave into the vegan products. I mean, we are in a time now where there's a plethora of vegan options and new products come out all the time. And I gave in. I ate a whole lot more on the vegan junk food end of the spectrum than I had originally planned because I really wanted to do this for health. And I noticed a change in my body. I noticed a change in my energy. And about 18 months ago, I kind of cleaned up that vegan junk food way of eating to follow more of a whole food plant-based way of eating. And that I really noticed a difference. I lost weight. I lost adult acne. I have more energy than I've ever had in my life. I no longer have what I call the couch coma, where you work all day and as soon as you get done work, you eat something quick and processed out of the fridge and then kick your feet up and you're just exhausted the rest of the night, right? Like I have so much energy. I can explore places on our travels. I can hike and just participate in a lot more active hobbies than I ever would have been able to even eating a lot of the processed vegan junk food left me feeling a little groggy and kind of frustrated.
How did you clean up your diet?
I actually made a commitment and a pact with myself that I would eat whole food, plant-based, mostly unprocessed as a daily habit. I really looked at the mindset around it, and it's something that I work a lot with my clients on too, is just the mindset around making this a lifestyle change. And I really focused my intention around the way that I ate as whole food and clean and not even necessarily having to be homemade, but fewer ingredients, more of the whole grains and beans and whole vegetables versus a lot of the processed foods. Now, that's not saying I don't enjoy a vegan burger every now and then, or some French fries at a restaurant, or even a vegan donut when I come across a vegan donut shop. But my daily intentions are to eat as whole food, plant-based as possible because of the way that it makes me feel.
Now, what did you struggle with most when you first became vegan?
Oh, wow. I really, really struggled with social situations. It seems like food, and this is probably common for a lot of people, and probably why a lot of people, do find that fear in the lifestyle change. But food is such a common element in celebrations. We go out for our birthdays, we eat cake, we have barbecues to celebrate graduations and holidays. And there's just so much that food is a part of our celebrations and our traditions. And I really struggled in the beginning. I remember one event specifically. We were there and I didn't know what I know now, of course. And the only thing I could find was an enriched, and it probably wasn't even vegan, but it was an enriched white bread hot dog bun and the burger toppings of iceberg lettuce, tomatoes, onions, and some ketchup and mustard. And that was what I ate because there was no vegan option. And now I always tell people, plan ahead, talk to the host or hostess, offer to bring a salad, something that will satisfy you. I love to bring a whole grain salad, maybe with farro or whole grain pasta, or even a hearty potato salad, something that I know will satisfy me as my main dish. And then if there is a salsa that I can eat, or guacamole, or carrots and veggies and hummus, things that I can eat that may not be whole food plant-based, but are still vegan, then I can participate in that. But other people can also try the foods that we bring.
Now, what did you learn from that struggle and how did you overcome it?
The big thing that I learned was to always be prepared. And I say that with one caveat. I'm not talking about being prepared with a granola bar in your purse. I'm talking about, or in your bag or in your pocket or in your car. I'm talking about really being prepared with a meal that's going to satisfy you. Because there's nothing worse than being a brand new vegan and watching people chow down on burgers, which was one of my hangups, only to be eating a dried up granola bar that's been broken into crunchy bits that's been in the bottom of my purse for 2 months. I mean, really be prepared. I've really started to ask hosts and hostesses, what are you serving? If they're serving burgers, I throw some black bean burgers, pull them out of my freezer. I always have a couple prepared. I throw those on the grill on a piece of tin foil and just warm them up. If they're serving a dessert, I always try to bring a vegan dessert option because I love to have a cupcake when people are having cake, or a fruit salad. It's just something that's going to satisfy that sweet tooth. Because when you're stuck in those situations, if you didn't prepare and you didn't come planned, you may pivot away from your goals in that in the moment decision, and then you beat yourself up. And so for me, it was really about being prepared and really giving myself that grace to be okay with bringing food and eating it, because it's really, those events are really about the people. It's not about the food.
What have you found to be the biggest reason holding people back from going whole food plant-based?
Well, for me, it was fear. I honestly think for people, they think it's going to be too hard. I know you mentioned my cookbook in the intro, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to write those cookbooks, is really because I want plant-based eating to be accessible for people. So when I thought about what are the common objections, it's always time, it's too hard, and it's always money. And so I put intention behind really making recipes that people could make easily. I have one pot recipes. They're some of my favorite recipes now. I love the ones that are sheet pan. I throw everything in the oven on the sheet pan, let that cook while I finish work, and then I have a delicious whole food plant-based meal. But I never would have known that either before trying it. I wouldn't have known that I could get food ready in 40 minutes, by just dumping things out of a can or out of a prepped produce bag. A lot of produce departments now at grocery stores have things already cut up, onions already cut up, celery, carrots. You can do baby carrots. They're already prepped and ready to go. You can really make this very, very you can really make this way of eating match the time that you have with a little bit of planning and a little bit of knowledge.
I really love this budget-friendly plant-based diet cookbook. Now, you sent me an advance copy, and I appreciate that. It is just amazing. I love the way it's laid out. It's 3 whole food meals a day for just $7. I mean, because that's what everybody looks at, right? Everybody's like, it costs too much money to be whole food plant-based, or there's some kind of issue about this or that. And you basically break it down perfectly for them. You give them a pantry to work off of. You give them some tips for freshness of fruits and vegetables and herbs. And you even give them a grid of what to eat. I love the way you have this laid out. Can you tell us more about it?
Absolutely. I love the way that cookbook came together too. And I really appreciate your feedback and you saying this because it was a lot of work and it was a little bit different than the other cookbooks because I really took the time to price out the ingredients. Because I travel, I am never in the same grocery store more than a couple of times. If we go back to a location, we might hit the same grocery store, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm always changing grocery stores. And I don't really have access to the fancy grocery stores or the health food stores. Sometimes I'm in small little towns outside of a national park, and I really needed to find out what these foods were priced. How could we eat all of these delicious, flavorful, and whole food plant-based meals without breaking the bank every time? And what I really found with writing this book is that it's a lot of it is such a misconception because a lot of the foods that we do have access to at our local grocery stores that are naturally vegan, right? Our vegetables, our fruits, our whole grains like oats and farro, our potatoes, our beans can be purchased and utilized at a fraction of the cost that the vegan products that are on the market are. And I think that's where the misconception comes in.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people will say, well, vegan food is expensive. You're right. If you're buying a $10 vegan cheese, that is going to get expensive if you're doing it every week. But if you're not eating the processed vegan foods and you're making your cheese out of a butternut squash that you can get for a fraction of the cost and make 4 cups of it from one squash, that's a very different conversation. And, I just really liked the idea and the framework of providing people with these easy meal plans, having the grocery list right there accessible, and having that list of pantry foods really, really helps make it accessible. It really makes this easy. And I always tell people when you're trying to make a switch to a plant-based living, you want to make the plant-based foods convenient. If that means using canned beans, even though they're a little bit more expensive, because cooking beans in your Instant Pot or on the stovetop is too time consuming, then you have to figure out which is more of a priority for you. Is it the time or the budget? And really looking at where you want to maximize your effort with plant-based eating.
Everyone is short on money these days. What is the biggest thing that you can tell people to affect their budgets? Like what kind of cost-saving tips do you have?
I really, really like to use store cards because we travel full time. We have a whole key ring of cards from the different stores. They're rewards and shopper cards. Mm-hmm. There have been some of the locations that we've gone to on $100 grocery, we save $20. That adds up over the course of the year. I mean, You're talking about $20 a week. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. That's a really practical saving. And for us, it's a little awkward, right? Because we aren't at the same grocery store, but that's a huge way to save. Something else that I always recommend is to try the store brand. Now, my caveat with that is maybe don't buy the gigantic value size of the store brand ketchup if you've never tried it before, because we all do have flavor preferences. Mm-hmm. But if you do try a small one and you love it, oftentimes the store brand organic product is cheaper than the non-store brand or organic product. And they're often very similar in flavor and taste and texture. And I use the word organic specifically for ketchup because oftentimes the organic ketchup uses cane sugar versus high fructose corn syrup, which is just something that I watch personally. But it really is about looking at the ways that you can budget. Something else that I recommend is buying in bulk when you can, but not buying in bulk if you're going to waste food. So don't buy that case of bananas if you don't have room in your freezer to freeze them before they go bad or get rotten. But if you do have room in your freezer, you might get a discount on a case of bananas. Mm-hmm. It just depends on that food storage and your ability to use things up, as well as how you're going to use them throughout the week. Another tip that I have is to purchase grape or cherry tomatoes instead of a whole tomato, because often you don't need an entire pint of the grape or cherry tomatoes for a recipe. You could use half of that and double the amount of tomatoes with less waste. Because if you only use half of a tomato, what do you do with the other half of a whole tomato? You end up eating it, and then you need 2 tomatoes for for 2 recipes.
You're traveling a lot. You're on the road in an RV. What are some keys to maintaining a plant-based lifestyle while you're on the road?
For me, it's meal planning. I plan all of our meals. I also plan when we're going to visit a restaurant. So one of the things that I used to love, I'm a huge diners, drive-ins, and dives fan, and I always wanted to be the vegan version of Guy and show everybody all the vegan restaurants. But that's not practical, both from a budget standpoint and also from a health standpoint. I don't want to eat all those processed foods. So I am very selective on the vegan restaurants. So I always plan in, if we're planning to visit a vegan restaurant in the area or a restaurant that has vegan options, I always plan that in too. It helps with our budget because, as you said, we all want to save a little money, but it also helps keep us on that whole food plant-based plan and really look at what that week looks like. Something else I do is we have a regular sized refrigerator in our RV, and we do have a small pantry. I guess it's not a small pantry. It's probably a normal sized pantry for people who don't have a pantry. But we really make sure that we use foods that we buy so that we don't have something lurking in the back of the fridge that's going bad or spoiling. So I'm very conscientious of meal planning to make sure that I use all the foods that we buy so we aren't wasting food. And that's been very, very helpful on our travels as well, because we can do clean out the fridge stir fry or clean out the fridge soups or clean out the freezer soups. And things don't sit around for very long, which is nice when you're moving and you're towing your house on wheels pretty frequently, as we do.
Where did you get the courage to kind of come out of your comfort zone and start your project by creating cookbooks?
Wow, I had wanted to write a cookbook since I started VegInspired 6 years ago. And I really started that to inspire people to eat more plants. And what I found was, while the recipes on there are incredible and they're available to anyone, I still found myself looking at cookbooks, and I thought, geez, if I can get my recipes, and they're all new, you can't find the recipes that are in the cookbook on VegInspired, at least not in an inclusiveness. There's a couple that have floated on there, but they're all new and they're all exclusive to each book. I really wanted to make it accessible. And I knew that if those books were in bookstores and in people's kitchens, they would start using them and the recipes would become their favorites. And so I really set out to make the recipes something that would be a favorite. And I remember when I told some friends that I was going to write the first cookbook, and I remember them saying, "Ooh, can we be taste testers?" And that was when I knew that I had to do this. I had people who wanted to taste my food. And one of the most special recipes in the book is a mushroom stir fry. And it's special because my brother, who's not vegan by any means, was visiting, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to try a new recipe on you. I'm going to load it up with mushrooms. Will you eat it?" And he said yes. He went back for seconds, and that was all I needed. I just I just loved doing it. And once I did the first one, it really built up my confidence. And then the second and third just kind of rolled right off the coattails.
Yeah, I love going to VegInspired. And as I told you earlier, the ginger cherry smoothie is absolutely fantastic. It's one of my favorites. And, you got a lot of free recipes on there that people can go and try. And then when they realize how good those are, they can go buy your cookbooks.
Yes, definitely. That's a great way to start. And like I said, there are a few of the cookbook recipes that I've slowly dripped out, and more will come out as the years kind of go on, right out of the cookbook, just so people can get a sampling. And what I love too is that Amazon actually released some of the pages, and there's some recipes on there. So even if they aren't ready to jump in, they could go and try a couple recipes before they make that commitment, which I didn't even know they were going to do that when the book was submitted.
Yeah, that's a great option to taste test. And like I said, I have been to VegInspired, and there's some great recipes there that people should try out, and check out your cookbooks, especially that little trick on Amazon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that about the recipes on VegInspired. That has been a long adventure with the VegInspired website, and I just appreciate that you found some good recipes to try.
Now, what is one hack or habit or tip that helps you stay on your plant-based diet?
I mentioned this before. It really is meal planning. Because my husband and I both enjoy cooking, we can spend an hour in the kitchen after work talking about what we're going to eat for dinner. And that can leave people very hangry. So if anybody's listening and that's relatable to you, the what's for dinner conversation or opening all the cupboards looking, I highly recommend sketching out a quick meal plan each week. I like to use my calendar. I'll look at my calendar and say, okay, I work late on this day, so let's throw in some easy meals. And then Friday, I'm getting out early. Why don't we do a more high maintenance meal? And I really plan my meals based on the time that I have to cook, as well as meals that really excite me. So some meals I just make some ingredients and throw everything in a bowl and call it a taco bowl or a burrito bowl. And other times I make a full-on recipe with lasagna or something where I really need to follow a recipe in a cookbook or from Instagram or somewhere. So I'm very much about the balance of no recipe meals, which are meals that you just kind of throw the ingredients together. You might need to know how long to cook something, but it's not extensive, multi-step, taking you hours. And then other meals that might be a little bit more exotic or fancy, and really just kind of blending that with the time that you have. That's really been the one thing that's helped me stay on track, because I make the intention of the foods that I'm going to eat before the in-the-moment decision has to happen. And those in-the-moment decisions are the ones where we're tired, we grab that processed food, we order takeout, we eat something that doesn't align with our goal, and we beat ourselves up and we're frustrated. And that's really where meal planning has helped me stay on track.
Meal planning is a great way to save money as well.
Definitely. No more buying those things that sound good or look good. You can stick right to that grocery list with that plan.
A lot of times you end up at the grocery store, you're hungry, you just start grabbing things that, even if they're good, just say some avocados or some fruits and vegetables, and then you end up getting them home and they go bad because you're eating something else and you don't plan properly.
Yeah, that used to happen to us a lot with fruit. Fruit would look really good at the grocery store, especially stone fruit. It's one of my favorites, but it has so temperamental. It's those things that will often feel not quite ripe, and then you let it sit there, and then 2 days later you realize that it's overripe and now it's mushy, and that was always a huge frustration. So now when I buy fruit, I always make sure that I have some type of intention or plan. I'll wash it when I get home. I'll store it properly. I have a tip on avocados too to help you not waste. If you buy your avocados either not ripe or slightly ripe with a little give, you can actually store them in the refrigerator, and oftentimes they'll last several days longer than that funny meme where they say avocados not ready, not ready, not ready. And then the next minute it's overripe. We've all seen that. meme floating around the vegan world. And that's one way that we store our avocados is once they get that little give at the top near the stem and they're a little bit soft, we'll put them in the fridge in a reusable mesh grocery bag, and they stay great for a couple of weeks. We've kept them.
I love that tip. Now, besides your own cookbook, is there a book or cookbook or even documentary that you have suggested to someone who is transitioning to a plant-based diet?
Yeah. So, wow, I have a lot. One of the biggest, I would say, key components and resources that I often recommend is the starch solution. And the reason I recommend that is as a former yo-yo dieter and someone who had tried everything through most of my adult life to maintain and manage my weight, I was terrified of carbs. And carbohydrates that are unrefined and whole are really a staple in a vegan diet. And in order to alleviate that fear, I often need to provide people with, some accurate resources that show them that carbs aren't the problem. It's the fat that we eat with the carbs that really affects us from a weight management stage, also from a diabetes stage. I was recently listening to some information that the Esselstyns were talking about how fat really blocks the insulin and doesn't allow the insulin to get into the cells, which leaves it in the blood. And so it really is this, that book really helps people break down that fear of carbohydrates and see that a whole food potato is different than a French fry fried in oil, and that mashed potatoes with oil-free gravy are different than mashed potatoes made with butter and fat from animal dripping. So I find that to be one of the most supportive and quality resources for people that are switching to this, because it helps break down those thoughts about the foods that we eat.
Now, finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan, and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
I would say that now that I am vegan, I feel energized. There's just something about filling my plate with beautiful, colorful foods that brings this energy, and I guess I could give you multiple words, like joy and happiness. There's just this positive vibration that really comes from eating beautiful, colorful, whole food, plant-based meals that don't have to take time or cost a lot of money.
Now, do you have another word for before you were vegan?
Oh, before I was vegan? I really was just groggy, kind of just stumbling along, like status quo almost. And now that I'm vegan, it's this, like I said, this energy. There's this different positivity and vibration that comes, that shows me that it didn't have to be status quo, right? I could eat all the delicious foods and still enjoy all of the foods that I love without having to eat animal products.
Kathy, it's such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. What's the best way for people to find you on Instagram, the web, social media in general?
Yes, definitely. They can connect with me on Instagram at VegInspired. And I also host a free Facebook group, the VegInspired Foodies, where I share recipes, I do trainings every week, and just really provide a lot of support for people making the transition to a plant-based living. And then, of course, as you mentioned, they can hop on VegInspired.com and check out recipes and other free content that I prepare and provide each week and month.
Now, can you mention your cookbooks?
Yes, I have 3. The first one is the 30-minute whole food plant-based cookbook. That is a cookbook that focuses on 30-minute meals, everything from appetizers and breakfasts all the way to some amazing desserts. There's a vegan tiramisu in there that has a surprising ingredient. It's one of my most favorite recipes from that book. And then they also are salt, oil, and sugar-free. The second cookbook I wrote was the Super Easy Plant-Based Cookbook. And that cookbook is broken into 4 sections: a 5-ingredient recipe section, a no-cook recipe section, a one-pot and sheet pan type recipe section, and then they also have a 30-minute recipes as well. And all of them are different recipes. There's no overlap in the recipes. And one of my favorite recipes out of that is the chickpea El Pastor tacos. So they're roasted chickpeas, onions, and pineapple with lots of spices and goodness. And then you eat them with a fresh pineapple salsa. It's really delicious. And it's ready in, the time it takes for it to roast in the oven. And you don't have to dirty a bunch of pans, which in a small RV where I'm the dishwasher, I like those one-pot meals.
Thank you so much for being on Plant Your Seed.
Yes, thank you so much, Fred, for having me. I love sharing my story, and I hope that everybody found some value and some tips to take away to make plant-based eating more accessible for them.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.